Chapter 10. Lady of the House. The wedding was a whirlwind. The vicar had been waiting for them in his tiny white chapel, and rather impatiently at that. He hurried the ceremony, had them sign the papers with his wife as witness, and it was done. Just like that. There was no rose petals, no kisses, no cake. No one had thought to decorate the chapel or arrange for a bundle of flowers for her to hold. No friends or family cheering for them as they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. She felt like an afterthought, and remarkably alone. It all seemed like a formality, not at all what she had expected. Once they were outside the chapel, a royal carriage was waiting alongside their own, and Lady Tremaine wondered, her heart full of hope, if perhaps Sir Richard didn't have something grand planned for them after all. "Ah, it's the Grand Duke," he said. "Come, my lady, let me introduce you." Sir Richard rushed them over to the carriage, where a lanky man stood, sporting a formal grey livery and an elaborate moustache that reminded Lady Tremaine of a writhing serpent. "Grand Duke, this is Lady Tremaine, my new wife." The Duke wrinkled his nose, which made his mustache quiver. "So you've finally done the deed. Very good, man. The king expects you immediately. I assume you have all the paperwork signed and ready?" he asked. "I do, Grand Duke," said Sir Richard. "Very well. Then you may ride with me to the castle. It was lovely meeting you, Lady Tremaine. I will send your regards to the king," he said snottily, which made Lady Tremaine flinch. She had hardly had a moment to say a word, let alone send her regards to the king. Here she was already making the worst of impressions. "Things are done so strangely here, my love. Must you rush off to register our wedding papers now? I wish you could come back home with me to celebrate rather than go straight to the castle." She gathered from the look on his face that this was not to be the case, so she added, "But if you must go, then please let us depart with a kiss." She moved toward him, but he flinched and backed away from her. "Lady, please," he said stiffly, "not in front of the Grand Duke." Lady Tremaine flushed, embarrassed. She wondered how many more indignities she would suffer this day. Nothing was at all as she had imagined. As she made her way home in her carriage alone, she wondered how she had gotten herself into this mess. She was exhausted. Her wedding had been rushed, and her husband had already just started making excuses not to kiss her. She didn't have a good feeling about any of this. She felt more alone than she had after her first husband had died. At least in England she had had her friends to comfort her. Here she was almost entirely alone. When she returned to the chateau, she let herself inside and stood in the vast vestibule. The house was eerily quiet, and she decided she must be right. The servants had to be working on some sort of surprise wedding reception. Still, as she looked around at her new home, Lady Tremaine couldn't help but feel disappointed. The chateau wasn't as stately as she was expecting. It was a beautiful home, but not quite as grand as her previous home in London, and it was going to take some work to bring it to her usual standards. Well, she had money enough to plan to do just that the moment she was settled in. If this was going to be her new home, she was going to make it as lovely as possible. As she stood in the vestibule, envisioning all the changes she might make, a squat, round-faced woman, white hair piled into a pristine bun, descended the stairs with a large carpet-bag. "Welcome, Lady Tremaine," she said nervously. "Thank you, Mrs." Lady Tremaine paused expectantly. The old woman turned scarlet. "Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm Mrs. Butterpants. I was head housekeeper and Cinderella's governess." Lady Tremaine suppressed a laugh, not missing a beat. Was head housekeeper and governess? "Are you leaving then?" she said, surveying the woman. "I'm sorry, my lady. I assume Sir Richard told you. I was informed that my services were no longer needed now that Cinderella has a stepmother." Lady Tremaine narrowed her eyes, her hand reaching for her brooch for comfort. She thought it was odd, as she was certainly no replacement for a proper governess, but she thought it prudent not to argue, and quite frankly she was much too tired. "I see. But what will you do, Mrs. Butterpants? Do you have another means of employment lined up? The woman smiled. You're so kind to ask. My brother has a bakery in a neighboring kingdom. I'm sure you passed through it on your way. The one with the very tall tower. I'm going to help him. Lady Tremaine laughed at the idea of a family of bakers called Butterpants. Well, good luck then, Mrs. Butterpants. Before you go, may I ask where the other servants are? I was surprised they weren't here to greet me when I arrived. Mrs. Butterpants turned a deeper shade of scarlet than before. There are no other servants, Lady Tremaine. I was the last one. I was the last. Again, Lady Tremaine didn't understand, but she chose not to share her displeasure with the old woman. I see. Well, Mrs. Butterpants, I'd better not keep you from your journey. I assume Sir Richard has arranged your transportation? Mrs. Butterpants scoffed under her breath. No, my lady, but not to worry. My brother has sent a horse and cart to collect me. I think it might be waiting for me outside. Lady Tremaine shook her head. She was not impressed by the way Sir Richard ran his home. She would have her hands full getting this place into order. Well then, Mrs. Butterpants, have a safe journey, she said, feeling completely bewildered. Goodbye, Lady Tremaine. Good luck to you, she said, as she made her way to out the front door. And something about her tone sounded as if she thought Lady Tremaine would need it. Lady Tremaine just stood there for a moment, taking in the size of the place, wondering how it could possibly be managed without a staff. Just then, Nanny Pinch came down the stairs looking frantic. Lady Tremaine, do you realize there is no staff here whatsoever? Lady Tremaine did her best to remain calm, again reaching for a brooch for comfort. She was happy she had worn it for the journey, because she was feeling she needed an extra layer of protection in this strange new place. Yes, Nanny Pinch, I know I only have you for a fortnight before you must go back to London, but could I prevail upon you to stay a bit longer, just while Rebecca and I arrange for a new staff? Nanny Pinch looked almost as uncomfortable as Mrs. Butterpants had. My lady, what am I thinking, speaking with you about servants when you've just returned from your wedding? I'm so sorry. Where is Sir Richard? She asked, looking around for him. He had some business at the castle. Things are done so strangely here, Nanny Pinch. The moment we were married, the Grand Duke was there demanding he file our marriage contract with the king, said Lady Tremaine. But you didn't answer my question. Could you find your way to stay on just a little longer? I'm sorry, my lady. I wish I could stay, but I just can't. I hate the idea of being so far from my mother. It would take ages for me to get home, should she need me, said Nanny Pinch, looking sincerely sorry. Lady Tremaine clenched her fist, wishing she were in London, surrounded by her own servants in her own home, with beautiful things that she loved, where Nanny Pinch would be happy to stay on. I understand, Miss Pinch. I appreciate you agreeing to stay as long as you have already. I know you have to get back to London to your mother. You're a devoted daughter, and she is lucky to have you. I promise I won't keep you a moment longer than we agreed. Now, I suppose I'd better see how one goes about finding servants in the many kingdoms. Nanny Pinch smiled. I think Rebecca can help you with that, she said. Yes, how clever of you, Nanny Pinch. I knew that girl would be a boon to me. Now I suppose we'd better go upstairs and break it to the girls that there will be no wedding reception this evening. Not for the first time that day, Lady Tremaine wondered if she had made the right decision, bringing her girls clear across the world where they didn't have a single soul who loved or cared for them.